All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into an explainer designed specifically to help you absolutely crush optics. Now, look, I know what you're thinking. For a lot of us, revisiting optical physics sounds, well, just about as fun as a mandatory 6 a.m. hospital compliance module, right? It feels pretty far removed from the clinical medicine you practice every single day. But listen to me. As an educator and as a residency program director, I promise you this. Really getting the foundational physics of Vergence and lenses down, it is not just about passing your OCAP exams or your written boards. It is literally the bedrock of refracting your patients, interpreting their prescriptions, and ultimately restoring their vision. So today, we're going to build a mental scaffold for optics that is so rock solid, you won't ever need to rely on just short-term memorization again. We're aiming for true, long-term clinical mastery here. So let's get into it. Here's our quick roadmap for this session. First up, we'll cover the definition of vergence, then the rules of optical engagement. After that, plus lenses and convergence, followed by minus lenses and divergence. And we will wrap up by calculating dioptric power. All right, section 1, the definition of vergence, understanding light rays. Before we even think about calculating anything, we have to precisely define our terms. Optics is super logical, but it absolutely punishes ambiguity. So we're starting right at the foundation. The core concept here is actually remarkably simple. Vergence is literally just a term that describes a relationship. You can kind of think of it like cars driving on a highway. With respect to a given point, what are these light rays doing relative to one another? And they really only have three options. They can spread out, which we call diverging, they can come together, converging, or they can run perfectly parallel to each other. That's the whole shebang. And to quantify this relationship, we measure vergence in units called diopters, which you'll usually just see abbreviated with a capital D. Which brings us to a super critical baseline. When light rays are running completely parallel to one another, so they aren't spreading apart and they aren't coming together, the vergence is exactly zero diopters. This is basically your optical neutral ground. Whenever you think of parallel rays in optics, I want you to immediately anchor your mind to the number 0. Okay, let's pause for a quick active recall exercise. This is a classic board-style check of your foundational knowledge. Think about the natural world around you. Where do converging rays, meaning rays that are just naturally coming together on their own, actually occur in the real world? I'll give you a second to lock in your answer. Well, if you guessed nowhere or almost nowhere, you hit the nail on the head. And that brings us perfectly to Section 2, Rules of Optical Engagement, the Laws of the Universe. To understand exactly why converging rays are so incredibly rare, we need to look at the fundamental laws of optical physics. You really want to think of these as the absolute laws of the universe for this topic. First off, light rays emanating from any point are always divergent. Always. Converging rays pretty much do not exist in the natural world. If you want light to converge, you have to force it to do so using a refracting surface, like a lens or a curved mirror. Now, let's talk about conventions, because man, this is where classic board traps are set all the time. In all our optical diagrams and vergence problems, we assume light always moves from left to right. Because of this, we establish a really strict coordinate system. Picture a standard mathematical number line with the lens sitting right at 0. Everything to the left is negative, everything to the right is positive. I want you to internalize the sign convention right now. Left is negative, right is positive. If you lose track of this mental model during an exam, your math is just going to completely fall apart. So now that we have our ground rules, let's move to Section 3. Plus lenses and convergence, bringing light together. Let's look at the first tool we use to basically bend light to our will. There are two basic types of spherical lenses, and we're going to start with the plus lens. All right, let's dive into this. The fundamental superpower of a plus lens is its ability to induce convergence. Remember our universal rule. Light naturally diverges. A plus lens actively fights against that natural tendency by bringing light rays together. Try to visualize this sequence. Imagine parallel light rays, which, remember, have a vergence of exactly 0, entering our plus lens from the left side. As they pass through that refracting surface, the lens induces convergence. The rays are physically bent toward each other until they finally meet at a single, distinct focal point over on the right side of the lens. Now pay attention, because here is a massive OCAP pearl. Do not confuse the ultimate direction of the rays with what the lens actually accomplished. Let's say you have highly diverging rays entering a plus lens, and when they exit, they are actually still diverging. Did the lens fail? No way. The exiting rays are less divergent than they were before they hit the lens. Convergence has still been added to the system. The plus lens did exactly what it's supposed to do. It just didn't have quite enough power to completely overcome the massive divergence it started with. Always think in terms of what the lens added to the overall equation. All right, section 4. Minus lenses and divergence, spreading light apart. We're shifting our focus here to the exact opposite mechanism. If a plus lens brings things together, what's a minus lens going to do? Exactly. A minus lens induces divergence. It basically takes incoming light and spreads it apart. If parallel rays enter a minus lens, they are going to exit spreading outward. If converging rays enter a minus lens, they'll exit less convergent than before. Just like the plus lens, the minus lens is simply adding its core property, divergence, to whatever state the light was already in. I really want to flag a common conceptual trap here that catches residents on boards all the time. When parallel rays hit a minus lens and spread apart, if you were to trace those spreading rays backward to the left side of the lens, they look like they originate from a single focal point. But, as foundational physics warns us, the light isn't actually physically diverging from that point. That is exactly why it's always drawn with dashed lines. It forms a very important image at this location, for sure, but it is a virtual one. It's not the kind of image you could project onto a physical screen. You absolutely have to understand the difference between the physical reality of the light rays moving left to right and that mathematical focal point that we just traced backward to the left. Which leads us straight into section 5, calculating dioptric power, the clinical math. Up to this point, we've built a really strong conceptual and visual mental model. Now we've got to translate those visual concepts into clinical math. We need a way to quantitatively express a lens's ability to induce vergence. So here is the exact definition that you need to commit to memory. The dioptric power of a lens is the reciprocal of the distance to the point where incoming parallel light rays would intersect. But notice this absolutely crucial caveat. The distance must be measured in meters, not centimeters, not millimeters, meters. Honestly, if a board question gives you a focal distance in centimeters, your literal very first step has to be converting it to meters. Otherwise, your reciprocal math is going to be completely wrong. And this perfectly illustrates exactly how that math plays out in actual practice. Let's just walk through it together. A +1 diopter lens is going to focus parallel rays at a distance of 1 meter. The reciprocal of 1 is 1. Simple enough, right? But watch what happens when we bump the power up to a +2 diopter lens. The focal distance shrinks down to 0.5 meters. 1 divided by 0.5 gives us our +2 diopters. Basically, a stronger lens bends the light much more sharply, bringing it to a focal point that is much closer to the lens. Okay, now take a breath, and let's apply this to a -1 diopter lens. Remember those sign conventions from earlier? The minus lens causes parallel rays to diverge, which means our mathematical focal point is traced backward to the left of the lens. And because it's on the left side, the distance is -1 meter. 1 divided by -1 gives us our power of -1 diopter. So the really crucial takeaway here is seeing how the optical laws and the clinical math align perfectly. Plus lenses have positive diopters because they focus parallel rays to the right of the lens, which, as our rules dictate, is a positive distance. Minus lenses have negative diopters because their virtual focal point for those incoming parallel rays is traced to the left of the lens, which is always going to be a negative distance. These signs aren't just arbitrary. They are a direct mathematical reflection of the physical reality, all based on that left-to-right flow of light. Let's wrap up this explainer with one final, rapid-fire, OK-Pap-style question, just to verify your mastery here. Read the scenario carefully. If incoming parallel rays are focused at 1 meter to the left of a lens, what type of lens is it and what is its dioptric power? Let's think about our conventions. The focus is to the left. Left means negative. Therefore, the distance is -1 meter. The formula is 1 divided by the distance in meters. So 1 divided by -1 is -1. Therefore, it is a -1 diopter lens. And because it's a minus lens, it is actively inducing divergence. Well done. You now understand exactly how spherical lenses manipulate light. But what happens to our math when the eye isn't perfectly spherical and we actually have to add cylinders to correct astigmatism? Now that is where the real clinical magic happens, and it's a puzzle we're going to solve in our next explainer. Keep reviewing these foundations, and I'll see you then.